This podcast is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment. The opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the business psychos and does not reflect the viewpoints of their current or former employers or clients. Thank you.
It's the business psychos, and today we're gonna talk it out. The podcast about what execs shouldn't talk about. Connecting executives and those who aspire. We're here to have a conversation, yeah, we're gonna light the fire. It's the business psychos. Yeah. The business psychos.
Welcome. I'm Katie Bickford.
And I'm Mary Shao.
We are the business psychos. We have real talk about how to get the financial and developmental benefits of professional life while minimizing the impact on our humanity.
I'm having a blast with you. This is everything I've wanted it to be. I am so excited that we're doing this. It's warm here. Spring sprung here in New York City. I'm happy about it. I'm looking forward to spending more time out in the sun.
You have the best of both worlds. Tranquility in the Hamptons and a place in the greatest city in the world. So we've recorded one usable episode so far. I've been editing. It has been a forcing function for self-awareness, hearing how some of my statements come off differently than they feel coming out. I'm not even going to talk about my vocal affect and my liberal use of like and you know. P.S. and by the way, you are great and require very little editing.
Yeah, you're jinxing me. I am looking forward to discussing our topic today. It's near and dear to my heart, mental health at work. This is a personally meaningful topic for me. I have family and friends who have suffered with mental illness. I've done my own self-work over the years. I'm not happy that so many people are suffering, but I am glad that we're talking more openly about it.
Agreed. I don't think mental health has been a topic for the workplace up until just recently. And story time. My first professional job was as a pharmaceutical rep for Eli Lilly. And for those unaware, Lilly brought the first modern antidepressant, also known as an SSRI, to the world. So I joined in 2001 when fluoxetine, aka Prozac, was about to go off patent. So we had cases of 30-day bottles, pretty unusual. A sample is typically for a week or so. Everything that follows is a hypothetical scenario that could have happened to someone in my position because the samples and their distribution are regulated by the government. Hypothetical. Let's say a pharmaceutical rep who had put themselves through college working full-time with a very strained family dynamic was now making good money, had some free time, and was able to finally take stock of the conditions of their personal situation. Now let's say this was generating a decent amount of despair. And they were driving around with a car full of pills. So even though I worked for the company talking about depression, it still wasn't anything to bring up about yourself. So whether this hypothetical rep reached into her samples, I'll leave up to listeners' imagination. What I will say is that a few years later, when I was back in the pit of despair, no longer working for Lilly, Prozac samples long gone, I went to my doctor and asked them to put me on Prozac. And they said, "Why are you so confident it works? There's no history in your chart." And so I was referred to a therapist, which wound up opening a lot of doors for my capability to believe in my ability to lead. So the timing was great. But when I started out, it was not acceptable to openly talk about this. And because it's addressed at arm's length, people tend to feel alone. And it wasn't until I was a leader and I had a broader view that I could see the prevalence of folks struggling. Yet there's still a wider denial.
During COVID, talking about wellness was a little more normalized. The beginning of any conference call, because we were all like hunkered down. It was like, hey, we have a little bit of permission to talk about this because we're all going through this crazy time. I've read the statistics. I feel that since COVID, things have gotten worse. What are your perspectives on the last couple of years, mental health?
Take a wider viewpoint. Post-industrial revolution work is unnatural, and the dehumanizing aspect is it's accelerating. Working like this is relatively new for humans. So in the 1800s, you had factories, which at least involved physical activity. But then in the 1960s, computers started sedentary office life. And then in the 80s, the Milton Friedman economics of shareholder over stakeholder, company profits over worker benefits took hold and built momentum. And now we're at a point where folks are losing their jobs with no notice over email. There's a nature versus nurture component to mental health, but ultimately the nurture or the conditions of daily life are becoming increasingly hard.
The data would support what you're saying, Katie. So as of 2 years ago, about 1 in 4 adults in America has a mental health condition. And over the last 2 to 3 years, suicide rates are up by 3%. That's pretty worrying statistics. And I am so used to being data driven that I wanted to put some statistics here, but I also want to pause myself because there are a lot of people behind those numbers.
These people, they're employees. These are people on your teams. They are your direct reports. Maybe you are the leader in an organization and you are suffering.
Thinking about each one of these folks turning up at work and going through the motions every day, feeling shitty, maybe depressed, anxious, signing onto Zoom calls and watching themselves in that little self view to make sure that their misery isn't showing. I'm kind of struck by this idea, struggling mentally in an environment where you have to hide that suffering as well as perform really well right through it, and how tough that is and how it just grinds you down and makes your condition worse.
Ooh. Yeah, and we should add, for those unmoved by human suffering, that there's an enormous financial cost. Employees that are happy are more productive. Mental health conditions, they cost billions in lost revenue, and they have a significant impact on the U.S. economy. So when we come back, we're going to dig deeper into how mental health shows up for work.
We are back. So, Katie, this is a big topic, huge.
Yeah, we aren't going to have time today to do it justice. I think we need to come back to this in a future episode. There's a lot here. And for now, let's look at the big picture and talk about productivity, reduction in work quality, and impact on morale.
It's easy to look at these statistics and say, all right, if this many Americans are suffering, they're all in the workplace. And then what does that mean? Is someone, driving the forklift into, a shelf? Or how does this actually manifest itself? And I think it affects the entire ecosystem of the workplace. And I think if it's serious enough and it goes on for long enough, it might even impact the culture. A very obvious one you just mentioned, productivity. So your mental health conditions are going to show up as increased short-term disability and leave of absence rates. It's also going to increase sick days. If you're lucky and you don't work in an organization that has very rigid fixed capacity models, maybe you can address that by throwing some more roles, getting some staff aug, you get some temp labor in to help. But in most cases, I think you're going to see project and product teams adjusting their initiative timelines or release dates. Ultimately, for everybody, I think it's going to mean spreading the work out across everybody who's left to compensate.
Reduction in work quality also is another way I see mental health conditions affecting the workplace. People who are struggling may not be able to perform consistently at the level they once did. They may be distracted. They may overlook important details, make more errors. All these factors are intertwined. And why does this matter? Well, we're looking at the decline of how we all experiencing the functioning world of products and services. Quiet quitting may tie into this. A member of staff without mental health issues could easily become resentful when they experience coworkers who are checked out or their workloads increase because more colleagues are out. So Mary, I can see how this could compound and ultimately lead to a strong team slipping to mediocrity.
I have seen this, and these are in the before times, before we were talking about this kind of stuff. I think it's scary. As a leader, it can feel very out of your control. It is almost contagious. It starts to spread a little bit. It erodes performance. It could lead to a low performing culture over time. It might start to attract people, more new hires for whom that kind of low performing environment suits really well. And then it becomes the norm. I also want to add collaboration as another way mental health conditions show up at work. So people who aren't feeling well may be less likely to offer or even be able to receive support from colleagues. And this can really negatively affect intra and inter-team dynamics. And from my experience, if you're working in a very large or a complex matrixed organization, this is going to have some serious consequences right away. I've seen folks anxious and depressed start to withdraw. Their communication styles are different. Maybe they're even irritable, or people will just report them as being difficult to be around, and they can't really put their finger on it.
Yeah.
Sally, I'm just going to always use these generic names. Sally, I don't know. It's just she's not approachable, and she always seems like I'm bothering her, right? We all have had people be reported to us, and when we ask for more information, it almost feels like it's hard to really put your finger on. And I think where this can be really problematic is in the escalation of risks and issues. This sounds really specific, but I think from my experience, it's been drilled into my head for so long. Having employees on the lookout for problems is important culturally for any industry that you work in, but even more so in highly regulated industries where you want your employees to feel very invested in the health of the company and protecting the company's best interests. And if you're suffering, that's really going to be the last thing on your mind.
Really important about where mental health impacts work. So let's talk a little bit about morale and, imagining an environment where people are checked out either physically or mentally. Less work gets done and what is done isn't great. And add into this poor communication skills and lower collaboration, and you're going to see people get pissed off and morale plummet. This is a tricky situation for managers to navigate. Even if you know for sure that people are struggling, you can't share this information openly. And even if you could, it wouldn't solve the problem. We're just going to take a quick break. And when we come back, what managers can do to navigate these situations.
We are back talking about the prevalence of mental health conditions and how they affect the workplace. So, Katie, we talked about how it might feel to work on a team with coworkers who are struggling. Now we're going to talk about how people can navigate these situations while taking care of both themselves and their teams. What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, take care of yourself. As you've said in previous conversations, it's the emergency oxygen analogy. Take care of yourself so you have enough in your tank to support others. We're not pouring from an empty or depleted cup. And I see happiness as having two primary components: how we're feeling right now and your sense of relative optimism for the future. So let's look at this in three components. So day to day, how you're feeling now, long term, and ongoing self-advocacy. So on the day-to-day, I recommend quick check-in. Look at, how do I feel physically, 1 through 10? How do I feel emotionally, 1 through 10? How do I feel mentally, 1 through 10? And this is just to bring consciousness and attention to these facets of what it feels like to be you right now. There isn't any necessary action that needs to be taken. It's just doing a check-in and making yourself present to how you're feeling right now. Another thing is using breath, and using breath effectively, and understanding that an inhale activates the sympathetic activating nervous system, and an exhale activates the parasympathetic rest and restoration part of our nervous system. So if you need energy, it's an emphasis on taking deep breaths. And if you need relaxation, it's an emphasis on exhales. So, you get people who will say oh, you're stressed out, take a big deep breath. It's better than not taking a breath, but it's also making you more stimulated. So using breath effectively, and little tools, the exercise of having your own back, bringing yourself into your present state in the moment, scanning your body, starting at your heels and the bottoms of your feet, and just bringing your attention there, and then the backs of your legs and your calves, kind of scanning up and just noticing the backs of your knees and your hamstrings up to your bum, lower back, the back of your abdomen, then to your shoulder blades, and then just explore the backs of your arms. Bring your attention to the back of your neck, the back of your head, the top of your head, and just use this moment of checking in. I experienced something that transcends rational explanation when it comes to checking in with how the back of my body feels. Do you have anything that you use?
Well, I'm a big fan of journaling, which I think gets into your daily awareness. I was really excited as you were saying this. I was thinking, gosh, I should do that because I cope through intellectualization. The risk is that I'm going to open up that journal, but I'm not going to be talking how I feel, right? So I really liked your first recommendation where you're asking yourself how you feel on those 3 dimensions. And I'm thinking I should probably add that to my journaling because my journaling ends up being much more in my head and I actually am really not tuned in to myself. So I think what I'm going to do is I have a daily reminder to drink more water, Katie. You'll appreciate this. And I think I'm going to add to that because I don't drink water at all. And so I'm just going to maybe do a check-in on like that, like kind of body scan. But I'm a big proponent of journaling, even if it is you're talking about all the things on your task list. It's just some time for yourself. And inevitably, as you start to get more comfortable making that space for you, I think more things start to come out naturally. I think the other thing I would recommend, and this is more, I think, for outside, would be just normalizing talking about mental health with everyone. So friends, family, your colleagues. I think the things that stay hidden are the things that hurt us the most. And even though you don't feel like you want to share when you don't feel well, it really is a very powerful statement of self-advocacy, as you were saying. And I think it has this follow-on effect of making other people feel more comfortable. I do think that there are some people, and maybe I am peripherally included in this category, who are managers who maybe feel a little uncomfortable being too vulnerable or opening up too much to their teams. And so they hear this advice and they're like, well, I don't know if I really want to do that. And I think what I would say to folks who feel this way is that a small, sincere gesture is really good. You do not have to dump your entire guts out on the Zoom call and tell everyone in your organization all the things that are worrying you. I have personally found that people really appreciate just simple acts of kindness and even some pretty generic sharing that's maybe not about work. I love to garden, or I talk about loving to garden. I'm really bad at it. And I used to talk about it all the time. It was one of those hobbies I picked up during COVID. It was a little bit of a distraction tool and something to kind of get me focused on something else. And then I started to talk about it at work, and it kind of became its own thing. Something to fill the first 3 minutes of the Zoom call when everyone's kind of getting themselves settled in and we're waiting for Sally to join because she's late. And I would just say, oh, yes, I'm thinking of planting this. And oh, hey, this thing's come up. And then all of a sudden, gosh, if I got a tomato, everyone was getting a damn picture of that tomato. It was like it was out for distribution. And this is not deep stuff. It's not even vulnerable personal stuff. But people actually seem to appreciate it. I think they did anyway. You can probably find out after this airs where people were like, no, we were bored. We hated it. But people started to send me gardening tips. They were sharing pictures of their beautiful gardens. And I felt like, at least for some people who maybe were not going to just reach out to me on any other topic, this was some safe ground for us to sort of join and talk about some non-work things, which ultimately was helpful.
Yeah. Well, if you look at the book I wrote, you can see what my hobby is. In terms of like conversation.
Like conversation.
Not available. We talked a bit about the short term in the moment, but also in the longer term outlook. Assessing your values and establishing whether you're on a treadmill or making progress towards things that really matter to you. There's the Thomas Merton quote that getting old is reaching the top of the ladder and realizing you climbed the wrong one. So investing and tapping into what is uniquely meaningful and satisfying for you, and determine if you're on a course to achieve it. And this notion can be very activating for people. They can say, I don't have a choice. I'm stuck on the treadmill. And this is something where Parinama method is very helpful and a larger conversation than what we have the time for here. I want to respect that that can be very activating or even registered as shame, or I'm doing something wrong, that I don't have this fully figured out. But it's a real shame to sense you should know the answer, though you do not, hold you back from investigating it because once again, back to a life of regretting having not actually done something when there might have been the opportunity to. One thing I just want to speak on as far as self-advocacy is concerned, most employers are not trying to solve your mental health issues, and your behavior is taken at face value. So being in denial and avoiding your mental health it's bad for your career. And not having support and protections when you need them comes at a cost. Avoiding a diagnosis means that employers have no legal obligation to accommodate you. And also, if you're feeling conflicted about bringing your mental health to an employer, just getting support for yourself can be a survival lifeline. Earlier, I talked about my own experience, but it's worth noting that I never raised my needs to an employer. I have found a lot of fulfillment in helping members of my organizations pursue therapy. I have never brought forward any requests for accommodation. So I am certainly not in a position to shame anyone who doesn't feel comfortable. I think managers should evaluate their work style and consider if it's contributing to your team's stress. And this is where a little self-awareness and parinoma go a long way. You don't want to be speaking at a conference about the importance of self-care, while at the same time you're stressing out your team and having them wrestle with unclear objectives or unrealistic expectations. You'll contribute to what we've been talking about today. It won't help your manager brand integrity either, and you'll either look out of touch or just be a hypocrite.
I have one last one, and it's going to be a tactical one because I love my tactical stuff. I'm a strong believer in having good hygiene around employee check-ins, and very similar to what you said earlier about checking in with yourself. Managers should be replicating that by checking in with their teams. And given everything that we've talked about, prioritizing one-on-one time is really, really important. We have all been in environments where you're running late, you're sending a message, I'm 10 minutes, and then you end up having 10 minutes with the direct. It ends up being about projects, work, and you want to be that manager that knows your employees, that's asking the right questions. But frankly, in a really fast-paced environment, that stuff's going to get deprioritized super quick, or you're going to try to push it into a 10-minute remaining call, and the person is just going to feel appropriately uncomfortable opening up in that constrained period of time. So I think even if you need to set up a standing call, which is we're just checking in on you, right? We're not talking about project A or initiative B. This is just space for us to talk about how you're doing. This is where you can get to know your directs. You can get to know what their interests are. And you can also ask them outright outside of that other conversation. Hey, that project you're on is pretty stressful. How are you doing with that? Is there anything I can do to help support you? And somehow separating it from the work conversation, I think creates a little bit of a space where we can put our human hats on for a second and just have a conversation that's about how you are experiencing the work and do you need anything from me? I also think establishing this rapport and this cadence will help you understand what's bothering them before it becomes a performance or a behavioral issue that someone outside of the team brings to your awareness. And you can use these relatively safe spaces to maybe ask about some minor shifts before they become big ones. So one example I'm having is someone who is usually chatty and playful, who all of a sudden is very serious and quiet. Maybe they're starting to go off camera a lot. This was kind of an interesting thing in the COVID times. And even now, for those of you who are work from home or hybrid, the decision to be on camera or not sometimes has a lot of meaning around it. And sometimes people are perceived as antisocial if they don't want to be on camera. But sometimes people just be like, hey, the baby was up, the dog was barking, I didn't get a chance to do my hair. It's really interesting how video has kind of revealing some moods and what people are going through. But having these little spaces to talk about things is a great time to bring up observations in a compassionate and non-confrontational way. And then finally, I'm a big fan of taking notes for one-on-ones and sharing them with the direct. It's very, very busy. Sometimes I may have a perception that I'm being very clear, or they're having a perception that they're very clear. And having something written as sort of a shared understanding has helped me make sure that everybody's on the same page before there's any miscommunications or misunderstandings. And by the way, it also makes doing reviews super efficient.
As you're talking about this, I'm thinking about how much energy doing a good one-on-one takes. And why it is easy for them to slip. Even the fact that preparation for your one-on-ones takes work, and then having the conversation where you can be fully present and constructive while you are also incredibly busy in day-to-day tactical stuff is a very real challenge. We need to give ourselves a break when we're not good at it.
Say that to your employee too, right? That's a very human thing. If you're late, like I've said, someone was waiting for me. I hate when I keep people waiting. I'm running late. I'm really sorry. Give yourself a break, but also maybe share that too with the employee so that they know where you're coming from. I think it's kind of a humanizing expression.
When I look at my calendar and I see one-on-ones, I'm just sort of energetically budgeting my day. I'm like, oof.
When do you have those calls, by the way? I'm curious. When do you schedule your one-on-ones? I'll tell you mine.
I tuck them in places that work. So it's where they fit between existing commitments, standing meetings and things. I don't usually do any on a Monday. And I don't usually do any on a Friday. I'm just trying to think. But yeah. What's your answer? When do you do yours?
Late in the day. I get really intensely into things, and you and I have talked about like the energy and the pace and the beginning of my day in the early afternoon. I'm just running. And that's when I have observed that I haven't been, maybe not present is the right way of saying it. I'm still in like strategic or processing mode, and I'm not bringing my heart and my humanity to the conversation. And I'm aware of it, and I hate doing it, and it bothers me. So I'm like, all right, you know what? That intensity usually peaks. And so I like try to structure my day. Yeah. So all that heavy stuff is at the beginning of the day. And then I'm starting to like, get a little tired, a little crispy or whatever. And then I'm like, okay, then I can kind of relax. And then I'm shifting gears for myself for the whole day. And so I kind of compartmentalize those different aspects of work for me with people. And I agree on that. I don't do Monday. And I was trying for a while to do no meeting Fridays, which I definitely recommend. We should talk about that on another episode.
I tell folks that their one-on-one time is their time. And if they do not want to have the one-on-one, that they can always opt out of it.
Very cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Really do.
Like, because it becomes this theater otherwise, right? You're like, I'm doing this for you. So come on the call. That's a really good point. Yeah, I could use the time back.
They rarely decline. I always feel like that's just that's
the best.
I can't help but just totally love it. Full reveal of my relationship with one-on-ones. The more energy you give them, more value there is in them. Because I've certainly had bosses who put nothing into them. They sit down with you, and it's such a waste of time.
Yeah, it's better not to do it, right? Don't do it.
Worse than just let's spend some social time together, because it's this drag where you're just sitting there in this conversation that's just...
I've had people like, you never knew who was going to show up on the others. Like, it could be like the kind person, I want to know about you. And then maybe it's like how's this project going? Everyone's just sort of waiting for like what the ride was going to be today. And yeah, like I don't think people need more energy drains or drama or like just theatrical meetings. I think everyone would appreciate less of that.
In closing, I would encourage managers not to try to act like a licensed therapist. Some employees don't want to talk about it with you. Seeking guidance from HR, if you are concerned, finding out what resources are available, asking HR for a strategy with taking action. But remember, you can ask questions without disclosing your employee's name. I think this is an ongoing discussion, and we want to hear from you, our listeners. So if you have questions, comments, or want to share your own story or ideas with us.
Yes, if you found this useful, please like, subscribe, and share. Bye for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and share with other psychos you know. We'd also love to hear from you, so hit us up on our socials. You can find us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook under @BusinessPsychosPod. Bye.